everybody. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. For the next few programs, we have a very special treat. We're going to present to you highlights from Professor Dershowitz's current visit to Israel. He's here right now, and we're going to show you an exclusive interview with Alan and include exciting moments from his appearances in the Holy Land. Let's start with Alan's appearance with Ambassador Dori Gold, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs at the Mishkenot Sha'ananim Auditorium.
My opening question: the election results that we saw obviously gave the majority of the Electoral College to the president-elect, Donald Trump, who earned 306 electoral votes. Secretary Clinton earned 232 electoral votes. If you look beyond that, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the various governors' houses, the Republicans swept and won all of those. How do you analyze what occurred?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this nostalgic afternoon. Nostalgic in so many ways. My wife Caroline and I spent a semester in Mishkenot Sha'ananim as guests when I wrote my book, The Genesis of Justice. And I know that there are a lot of people from my past here when I hear people tapping me on the shoulder and calling me Avi, as Arthur did. Now, Arthur is in trouble. I get called a lot of things. Recently, Arutz Sheva had an article calling me a dibbuk because I supported the Democrats. Now, that's one thing to call me a dibbuk, but to call me a lousy basketball player, you will be hearing from my lawyer in the morning. We will have this out on court, not in court. 1-on-1, 21 points win, and I will expect a major apology from you, Arthur. So now, from the sublime, we'll get to the American election. I have to tell you, it wasn't that unpredictable to me. I wrote a book, and it has a unique title. It was called Electile Dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters, and the title came from the fact that polls showed that the vast majority of Americans hated both candidates and weren't voting for a candidate, they were voting against a candidate. And I wrote this book in 2 or 3 weeks in August of this year when Hillary Clinton was ahead by 12 points. And I predicted in the book that it would be an extremely close election, that Trump would probably win. And I looked at Brexit. I looked at what was going on around the world with the growth of populism, with the left getting more left all over the world, on university campuses particularly, with the right growing more right in Hungary, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Greece, France, and the movement toward extremes, the movement toward populism, and the movement toward instability and unpredictability. And I think it's a worldwide trend, and America is not immune from those trends. So it was obvious to me that Trump would do much better than the polls were predicting. I actually predicted there would be a split between the electoral vote and the popular vote. I actually thought it would go the other way. My own view was that Hillary might very well win the electoral vote, but Trump might win the popular vote. I got that wrong. But the election itself doesn't tell us much about the American public. It could have gone either way. So don't think of a Trump victory as a kind of mandate throughout America for his policies any more than you should have thought of a Clinton victory, if she had won, as a mandate for her. Essentially, America is divided. It's split down the middle. The 70,000 votes in 3 states determined the electoral outcome. It could have gone either way. By the way, I got booed for saying that at the Zionist Organization of America because I was trying to make a point. Israel must remain bipartisan. It must remain a bipartisan issue. We can never allow an election to become a referendum over Israel because we could lose. And I used the fact that the election was essentially a tie and could have gone either way as proof that those of you who think that only we should appeal to one party, not the other, are making a serious mistake. So I think the one thing we know for sure about the Trump administration, we can predict this with 100% certainty, it is unpredictable. We cannot know what's going to happen. because if you look at the appointments he's made for the cabinet, they do not reflect a consistent policy. You can't discern from anything he's done in the appointment process what his policies are globally, domestically, certainly not in relation to Israel. When he appointed the Secretary of State, did he think about Israel? Of course not. When he appointed the head of the CIA, who was my student, a very bright guy, no. So his position toward Israel is represented by statements that he made, and that's a low threshold, in which he said, my son-in-law will help us resolve the issue between the Palestinians. And first of all, son-in-law. Every American politician has a Jewish son-in-law. Let's start with that. Clinton, Cuomo, Roosevelt, Rockefeller, they've all been to our home. And the fact that you have a Jewish son-in-law doesn't tell you anything about any policy. I remember him, Jared, when he was a student at Harvard. He was a member of Chabad. I was the faculty advisor to Chabad. He's a very bright, talented young man, but he will not do what Dory Gold was not able to do, and that is bring about a resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict by his mere brilliance and charisma. It will continue, tragically, probably for years to come. So I think the outcome of the election remains to be seen. I made a very controversial statement among my liberal Democratic friends. I said my fondest hope, I was a strong Hillary Clinton supporter. My wife and I have been friends, personal friends with the Clinton family for many years. I worked very hard for her election. As soon as the election was over, I offered my help to Donald Trump on Israel, as I have to every president and every prime minister of Israel. And I said publicly, my fondest hope is that 4 years from now, I will be able to vote for Donald Trump with enthusiasm for re-election, hoping that he will be a great president. Now, if you want to take bets on it, I would bet on the underside of that bet in terms of prediction. But there's a difference between likelihood and hope. And as a patriotic American, I hope every president is a great success.
I actually had the chance to catch up with Alan in the spirit of our program for a one-on-one conversation at the business lounge of his hotel. I got to ask him about today's front page headlines in Israel, Amona, and what to expect from President-elect Donald Trump. As an advocate of Israel, if the Amona bill does pass, how will you continue to make the case for Israel, given the fact that Israel is taking away privately owned Palestinian land?
Well, it's not a matter of how I make the case. It's a matter of what will happen to Israel. Right now, I don't think that the International Criminal Court has its eyes particularly focused on Israel or the settlements. If the Amona bill is passed, that will change, and the International Criminal Court will very likely accept jurisdiction and bring Israelis in front of the International Criminal Court. Also, I think President Obama, during his lame duck period, is not now likely to allow the French resolution or other anti-Israel resolutions to come before the Security Council. But if the Amona bill passes, it will be seen by President Obama as a provocation. The Amona bill is a disaster for Israel, not only for its public relations, but for its actual standing in the international community. And anybody who cares about the interests of Israel will work against passage of the Amona bill.
I want to talk about a completely different issue. You've been quoted recently saying that you think it was a wise move for Israel to become closer to Russia. In fact, Netanyahu made more trips to Moscow than he did to Washington recently to visit Obama. Now, is Israel risking its friendship with Washington by growing closer to Russia?
I would put it exactly the opposite way, that the United States is risking its relationship to Israel by having created a vacuum and having moved itself out of the Middle East and having created a sense of weakness around the world. And any country, Israel or any other country, has to look for where the sources of power are. It's not only Israel that has moved closer to Russia. It's the Emirates, it's the Saudis, everybody who understands that Obama has weakened both Israel and the Sunnis in the Middle East and strengthened the hand of Iran. And so it's natural that Israel would try to create better relations with Russia, with China, with India, with South American countries, with African countries, with Muslim countries in Europe. And I think Prime Minister Obama is doing a very good job in reaching the hand of Israel out to all these potential allies.
Now, a very important issue to American Jews and Jews around the world is the need for a mixed-gender prayer section at the Western Wall. How important should we be making this issue?
it's a much, much more important issue to Israeli Jews. Let me tell you why.
Okay, I'd love to hear
American Judaism is thriving. I go to a Reform synagogue, an Orthodox synagogue, a conservative synagogue. I'm secular. In America, Jews love each other. We don't fight because there's no chief rabbi. Thank God there's no chief rabbi. The government doesn't tell us what to do, where to pray. Israel's religious life is a disaster because the government plays much too great a role. If Judaism is so positive, why do you need the state to support it? Why isn't it enough to have rabbis to bring people into the synagogue or tell people not to drive on the Shabbat? We have to get the state out of the area of religion, because once you put the state in the area of religion, it has to define not only who's a Jew, but who's a rabbi and what's a synagogue. And it just alienates so many people within Israel. The hatred between secular Jews and Orthodox Jews and Haredi Jews is so much greater in Israel than it is in the United States. It's so much better for religion to have a separation between church and state and mosque and synagogue. And so the Kotel belongs to all the Jewish people. It doesn't belong to one branch of Judaism, and therefore it is absolutely essential that this very sacred place for all of Jews be open to all Jews. I'm not suggesting that the major part of the Kotel suddenly become a Reform synagogue, but it should remain an Orthodox synagogue, and then there should be opportunities for conservative, Reform, people who want to pray with their wives, spouses, daughters together. That opportunity has to exist. My wife and daughter both are members of Women of the Wall. And when we come here, we love to pray at the Kotel in the way that we're entitled to. And no rabbi and no state official has the right to tell me how to pray, who to pray to, and in what manner to pray. That's just not what the nature of the nation state of the Jewish people should be. And that's not me speaking. That's Theodor Herzl speaking, who said in the Jewish state, let the rabbis remain in their temples. Israel should be a secular nation state for the Jewish people, all the Jewish people.
Now, let's talk a little bit about Naftali Bennett now, who, following Trump's election, said the chance for a two-state solution is now dead and that Israel will ultimately have sovereignty over the West Bank. First of all, is that a wise move for Israel to be making?
First of all, it will never happen. There has to be a two-state solution. The alternative to a two-state solution is that Israel will no longer be the nation state of the Jewish people, or it will no longer be the democratic nation state of the Jewish people. So there's no alternative to the two-state solution one way or another. And Naftali Bennett is simply not correct in his assessment of Donald Trump. Donald Trump will push for a two-state solution. Indeed, just yesterday, the American officials met with Palestinian officials and reiterated that it's part of their policy to have a two-state solution. Anybody who is against the two-state solution is either a radical leftist who wants to see one state which isn't Israel, or a radical rightist who wants to see one state which isn't the democratic nation state of the Jewish people. So we ought to forget about the prophets of doom who say that the two-state solution is dead, try to revise it, resuscitate it. It's not only best for international peace, it's best for Israel.
Now, speaking of policies that Trump has advocated for here in Israel, how likely do you think it's going to be that the U.S. actually moves its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? And is that a wise move for Israel, given the response we could see from the Arab world?
Every American presidential candidate promises to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and none of them do it. It ought to be done in stages. First, the United States ought to recognize West Jerusalem within the 67 borders as a legitimate part of Israel and end this absurd charade under which the Obama administration refused even to allow somebody born in a hospital in West Jerusalem to list it as Jerusalem, Israel. That's absurd. That should end today, and it should end on day one of the Trump administration. Step two is the United States should announce it is its policy that the United States Embassy will be in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the undivided eternal capital of Israel. But that step has to be taken in stages with coordination with the Saudis, with the Emirates, and with other countries that are forming closer alliances to Israel now because of the fear of Iran. You don't want that to blow up as the result of some symbolic act that doesn't have national security implications for Israel. National security is always more important than symbolism.
The subject of Iran also came up in a conversation with Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief Yaakov Katz at an event in Ra'anana.
So let's talk a second about Iran. You were, and you mentioned this just briefly before, you were a big opponent of the deal. You wrote the case against the Iran deal, I read somewhere, in 11 days, which means you really had it at the tip of your finger or tongue, and you knew how to get it out fast. But it's a done deal. And I think that, I recently had a talk with the IDF Chief of Staff, and I think if you go into IDF headquarters and you talk to the top military officers there, some of them will tell you, this is actually, it gives us some breathing room. It gives us the opportunity not to have to think about a strike against Iran tomorrow. We can think about what we have to do in 10 to 15 years. But right now, we get to take a step back. So assuming that we're not going to rip up the deal, what should Trump do? What should Netanyahu be asking Trump in that first meeting that they have?
So I wrote an op-ed exactly directed at that question, and it was entitled, "Don't Rip Up the Deal, Enforce It." And people forget that the opening chapter of the deal, the opening chapter twice has the following sentence: Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to develop or acquire nuclear weapons. That's in the deal. Now, the deal has a sunset clause, and it stops in 8, 10, 12 years, depending on which part of it. But all that does is allows them to develop centrifuges. But the development of centrifuges is allowed in the context of Iran's commitment never to develop nuclear weapons. So I have urged Trump to announce that it's American policy that Iran will never, ever, under any circumstances, be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, and to have Congress now authorize the president to take military action to enforce that part of the deal, to give him advance authorization to do that so he doesn't have to go back to Congress. And I think that combination will serve to deter Iran if they really think that the United States means it. Look, Iran's not going to be able to develop nuclear weapons. Why? Because no prime minister of Israel, I don't care if it's Benjamin Netanyahu, Tzipi Livni, Herzog, no prime minister of Israel, if they get solid intelligence that Iran is on the verge of developing a nuclear arsenal, will allow that to happen. That's why Israel has the stealth 35s. That's why Israel is trying to get, and with Trump probably will get, the bunker-busting bombs, the ability to go deep into the mountains and destroy the facility. So the question is not whether Iran develops nuclear weapons, the question is who stops it. And if Israel does it alone, it will be at great cost, militarily, lives, treasure, and international standing. But if the United States does it, or the United States and Israel, better yet, the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia do it jointly, it can really have a positive effect. Now, the most important thing is General Washington said during the Revolutionary War, he said the best way to prevent war is to have your enemy know you're ready to wage it. And if the Iranians know that the United States will prevent them from developing nuclear weapons, I think they won't do that. I think they won't take that risk. So it's very important that Israel, the United States, the Saudis together create a sufficient deterrent and disincentive so that Israel and the United States don't have to use the military force it now possesses. But I think you can sleep safely in knowing that Iran will not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. I think that's a given.
Now, besides the professor's conversation with Yaakov Katz, the event in Ra'anana was an especially emotional one for Alan because they dedicated a study hall in honor of his mother, Claire Dershowitz. What is the favorite part of this trip that you've taken to Israel this time around?
My favorite part is always walking through the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv with my wife and remembering the good times we've had here over the years, meeting with family. I dedicated a room in a study hall for women in Ra'anana last night to my mother, who died a few years ago at the age of 95 and who always favored learning for women. She always was a feminist, a Jewish feminist, who tried as hard as she could to encourage as much learning as possible within the Jewish tradition. And so it was a thrill to me to say the Shehecheyanu and to see the plaque in my mother's name in a room where many, many women will learn Torah and will learn how to bring together Torah v'Mada, Torah and secular learning.
As a shine of a tona geschenkt von Gott, nur dann auch die Schwede Schamar am keeping my day job, definitely.
That's all the time we have for today. Next week, we'll continue with more from Alan's visit to Israel before returning to our regular format with questions from you, our viewers. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to ILTV.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.